The scream tore through the trees before Alara even knew she had made it. Something was crashing through the brush behind her cabin, snapping branches, breathing hard, moving fast. She grabbed the iron poker from beside the cold fireplace and pressed her back against the wall, heart slamming so loud, she was sure whatever was outside could hear it too. The cabin had exactly one door and one window, and both suddenly felt like open wounds in her only shelter. "Odessa!" she shouted, but her guardian was not home. Odessa had left before sunrise, the way she always did on the first frost of the season, muttering about supplies and saying nothing else. Alara had learned a long time ago not to ask where she really went. The crashing stopped right outside the door. Alara held her breath. She could hear breathing now, low and ragged, not quite human. A shape moved past the window, a shadow far too large to belong to any deer or fox that wandered these woods. Her palms went slick around the poker. Every instinct in her body screamed at her to run, but there was nowhere to run to. She had lived in this clearing her entire life, and had never once been allowed past the tree line to the east. Then, just as suddenly as it started, the sounds stopped. Silence pressed in around the cabin, thick and unnatural, the kind of silence that follows something enormous holding itself very still. Alara did not move for a long time. When she finally worked up the courage to look through the gap in the window shutter, there was nothing there. No shadow, no shape, no broken branches. Only the gray light of morning settling over the frost-covered ground, as if nothing had happened at all. She told herself it was a bear. She told herself that every single day for the next 2 weeks, and every single day she did not believe it. Alara had grown up with more questions than answers. She knew her name, and she knew the woman who raised her, but she did not know why Odessa flinched every time thunder rolled over the mountains, or why the woman kept every window nailed halfway shut even in summer, or why there was a locked chest under the floorboards that Alara had never once been allowed to open. She knew she was different from other people, though she had barely met more than a handful of them in her whole life. She ran faster than seemed possible. She could hear conversations from impossible distances, could smell rain an hour before the clouds even gathered. Her senses did not behave like a normal person's senses, and when she asked Odessa why, the answer was always the same tired sentence. "When you are older, Alara, not yet." She was 22 years old. She was beginning to think older was a place that would never actually arrive. That evening, when Odessa finally returned, she looked different. Her face was pale, her hands trembled slightly as she set down the sack of supplies, and there was a tightness around her eyes that Alara had never seen before, not even during the worst storms. "Something happened," Alara said. It was not a question. Odessa did not answer right away. She moved through the small cabin, checking each window latch twice, then a third time, before she finally sat down across from Alara at the wooden table they had shared 10,000 meals over. "There is unrest near the eastern border," Odessa said carefully. "Patrols have been coming closer to the woods than usual. I want you to promise me you will not go near the tree line, not even to gather herbs, not even during the day. You've told me that my whole life." "And I am telling you again," Odessa said, her voice sharper now, "because this time it matters more than it ever has." Alara studied her guardian's face, the deep lines carved by years of worry, the gray creeping steadily into hair that had once been dark and full. She had asked 1,000 times who her real parents were, why they lived so far from any town, why Odessa carried herself like a soldier standing guard over something precious and hidden. She had asked 1,000 times and received nothing but silence or half-sentences that led nowhere. "Why do patrols come near the woods at all?" Alara asked instead, choosing the question that might actually get an answer. Odessa's jaw tightened. "Because tomorrow night, the pack that rules these lands holds its mating ceremony. Every eligible woman in the territory will be presented before their alpha king, and every soldier they have will be stationed at the borders to keep order. It happens every year. It will be over in 3 days, and then the woods will be quiet again." "What happens at a mating ceremony?" "Things that have nothing to do with us," Odessa said, standing abruptly and carrying the empty sack to the small pantry, ending the conversation the way she always did, by simply walking away from it. But it was not nothing to do with them. Alara could feel that much, even without being told. She could feel it in the tightness of Odessa's shoulders, and the extra locks that appeared on the door that very night, and in the strange restlessness that had settled into her own chest, a feeling like standing at the edge of a cliff, without knowing why she had walked there. She did not sleep well. Twice she woke to the sound of something moving beyond the cabin walls, distant, careful, deliberate footsteps that were gone by the time she reached the window. By the third time, she stopped checking and simply lay awake, staring at the ceiling, listening to her own heartbeat compete with the sound of the wind. Miles away, in a hall built from stone and old timber, Alpha King Ronan Voss stood before 300 of his own people and felt nothing at all. The mating ceremony had been prepared for months. Every unmarried she-wolf of proper age and standing had been presented to him one by one throughout the evening, dressed in their finest, their scents carefully arranged, their families watching from the gallery, with the kind of hope that made Ronan's chest ache with guilt he could not explain. He had shaken hands, exchanged pleasantries, walked the length of the hall a dozen times, searching for the pull every wolf was supposed to feel when standing before their fated mate. He felt nothing, not even a flicker. His beta, a broad-shouldered man named Finn Whitlock, stood at his shoulder throughout the entire ceremony, watching him with the careful patience of someone who had known him since childhood and understood exactly what his silence meant. "Nothing," Finn murmured, not quite a question. "Nothing," Ronan agreed. The council seated along the raised platform did not bother to hide their disappointment. Garrick Thorne, the oldest and most vocal among them, leaned forward with his hands folded, studying Ronan the way a man studies a horse he suspects is lame. "This is the third ceremony you have walked away from empty-handed, my king," Garrick said, his voice pitched to carry. "The pack grows restless. An alpha without a mate is an alpha without an heir, and an alpha without an heir invites challenge from every rival pack watching our borders." "I am well aware of the politics, Garrick," Ronan said evenly. "I will not choose a mate simply because the calendar demands it." "The bond does not always announce itself the moment two wolves meet," Garrick pressed. "Sometimes it must be encouraged." "My wolf will know," Ronan said, and there was enough steel in his voice that even Garrick sat back, unwilling to argue further in front of the assembled pack. But privately, alone in his chambers later that night, Ronan was not nearly as certain as he had sounded. His wolf had been restless for weeks now, pacing beneath his skin at odd hours, drawn towards something he could not name. It happened most strongly at night, and it happened most strongly when the wind blew in from the east, from the deep, unclaimed woods that bordered his territory. He had chalked it up to stress, to the pressure of the ceremony, to the weight of ruling a pack that expected him to secure its future. He was wrong, though he would not understand exactly how wrong for several more weeks. That night, unable to sleep, Ronan left the safety of the pack house and walked the training grounds alone, the cold air doing nothing to settle the restlessness clawing at his ribs. His wolf paced and pulled toward the eastern tree line with an insistence that felt less like instinct and more like a summons. He had never felt anything like it before. Not once in 28 years of life had his wolf reacted this way to anything, and the not knowing was beginning to frighten him more than he cared to admit. He stopped at the edge of the training grounds, staring out at the dark line of trees in the distance, close enough to see, but far enough that reaching it would mean walking past every border patrol he had stationed there himself. "Something is calling me," he said quietly, more to himself than to anyone. Behind him, Finn's footsteps approached, unhurried and familiar. "Calling you where?" "East." Ronan did not turn around. "Past the border. I don't know what it is. I've never felt anything like it." Finn was quiet for a long moment. There have been rumors for years about that stretch of woods. Old stories about a bloodline that used to hold that territory before the war. Nobody's confirmed anything. Nobody's even patrolled that deep in a generation. "What kind of bloodline?" "The kind our fathers didn't like to talk about," Finn said carefully. "I only know pieces. If you want the whole story, you'd have to ask someone older than either of us, and even then, I'm not sure they'd tell you the truth." Ronan turned to look at his friend, something sharpening in his gaze. "Find out what you can. Quietly. I want to know what's out there. You think there's a connection between whatever's pulling you and whatever's hiding in those woods." "I don't know what I think," Ronan admitted. "I only know I've never felt anything like this before, and I don't intend to ignore it simply because the timing is inconvenient." Finn nodded slowly, understanding, without needing further explanation. "I'll ask around. Carefully." If Garrick catches wind of you sniffing around old bloodline rumors right after walking out of another failed ceremony, he'll have a field day. Let him, Ronan said, turning back to stare at the tree line. I'm done pretending I feel something I don't, just to satisfy the council's timetable. If there's a reason my wolf won't settle, I intend to find it. He did not know, standing there in the cold with the wind carrying strange and unfamiliar scents from the east, that somewhere beyond that tree line a young woman named Elara was lying awake in her own bed, feeling an identical restlessness pulling at her chest. An ache she could not name pointed in the exact opposite direction, toward him. Neither of them understood yet what that meant, but something old and patient had already begun stirring in the dark, and it would not let either of them rest for long. The next morning, Elara woke before dawn with her heart already racing, the same way it had every morning since the crashing sounds began. She lay still for a moment, listening to the birds outside slowly waking the forest, and tried to convince herself the strange pulling feeling in her chest was nothing more than a bad dream lingering too long. It did not feel like nothing. It felt like a string tied somewhere deep inside her, pulled taut, tugging steadily toward the east. She dressed quietly and stepped outside before Odessa woke, drawn by an urge she could not explain and did not fully trust. The morning air was sharp and cold, and the woods around the cabin were unusually silent, as if even the animals sensed something shifting in the world. Elara walked the familiar path toward the small stream, where she gathered water each morning, but her feet kept drifting east, past the markers Odessa had placed years ago, to show her exactly how far she was allowed to go. She stopped herself at the last marker, a flat gray stone half buried in moss, and stood there, staring past it, into deeper trees she had never once explored. Something moved in the distance, too far to see clearly, but close enough that she felt it, the same way she had felt the presence outside her cabin weeks earlier. Her breath caught. For one long, suspended moment, she was certain something was staring back at her from within the trees, something that recognized her the way she somehow, impossibly, recognized it. Then a hand closed around her wrist, and she nearly screamed. "What are you doing out here?" Odessa hissed, spinning her around with surprising strength for a woman her age. Her face was white with fear. "I told you never to come this far." "I felt something," Elara said, still staring past her guardian's shoulder at the trees. "Someone. I don't know how to explain it, but it's the same feeling from the night the cabin was surrounded. It's calling me, Odessa. I don't understand what's happening to me." Odessa's grip on her wrist tightened, and for the first time in Elara's entire life, she saw genuine terror in the older woman's eyes. "We need to go inside," Odessa said, her voice shaking now. "Right now, and you are not to come out here again. Not for any reason. Do you understand me? Not until I say it is safe." "Safe from what?" Elara demanded, pulling her arm free. "You keep telling me things aren't my business, that I'm not old enough, that I'll understand when I'm older. I'm 22 years old, Odessa. I have spent my entire life in this clearing not understanding anything, and I am done accepting that as an answer." Odessa's shoulders sagged, and for a moment she looked impossibly tired, worn down by years of carrying something heavy and secret all alone. "You deserve the truth," Odessa said quietly. "You have always deserved the truth. I have only ever tried to protect you from it, because the truth about who you are has already cost people their lives, and I could not bear it if it cost you yours as well." Elara's chest tightened. "Then tell me, please, I need to know." Odessa glanced past her one more time toward the tree line, toward whatever unseen presence had drawn her out there in the first place, and something in her expression shifted from fear into a kind of resigned sorrow. "Not here," she said finally. "Come inside. It is time you knew where you came from, and why I have spent your entire life keeping you hidden from a mating ceremony you were never supposed to know existed." They walked back to the cabin together in silence, and Elara's mind raced with questions that had waited 22 years to be answered. She did not know yet that miles away, an Alpha King was asking his own Beta to search for answers about the very same secret. She did not know that the pull she felt toward the east was not imagination or coincidence, but something ancient and undeniable finally beginning to wake after a lifetime asleep. All she knew was that the woman who raised her was finally ready to speak, and that whatever truth waited on the other side of that conversation would change everything she thought she understood about her own life. Inside the cabin, Odessa bolted the door, checked the windows twice out of habit, and finally sat down across from Alara, with the kind of stillness that comes only after a person has decided there is no more use in running from something. Your mother's name was Cassia, Odessa began, and Alara felt the ground shift beneath her for the very first time. Alara sat frozen, waiting for the rest, but for a long moment Odessa said nothing more, as if the name alone had cost her something to speak aloud. Cassia was strong, Odessa continued finally, her voice low and careful, and she was kind, and she was hunted by people who feared what her bloodline represented. She was the last surviving daughter of a family that once ruled territory beside the pack that governs these lands now. There was a war, many years before you were born, between her family and the family that rules today. Her people lost. Almost everyone with her blood was killed in that war, wiped out so thoroughly that most wolves alive today believe her bloodline no longer exists at all. But it does, Alara said quietly. Because of me. Odessa nodded. Your mother survived the war by hiding, the same way I have hidden you every day since you were born. She met your father years later, far from these lands, and for a short while she believed she had finally escaped her past. She was wrong. The pack that destroyed her family never stopped searching for any surviving trace of her bloodline. They found her when you were only a few months old. Alara's throat tightened. What happened to her? She sent you away with me, Odessa said, her eyes glistening now with old grief she had clearly carried alone for far too long. I was her closest friend, the only person she trusted enough to protect you. She gave me everything she had left, her supplies, her warnings, and you, wrapped in a blanket that smelled like wood smoke and fear. She told me to run as far as I could and never look back, and to never, under any circumstances, let anyone learn who you truly were. And she stayed behind, Alara whispered, already knowing the answer before Odessa spoke it. She stayed to buy us time, Odessa said. I do not know exactly what happened to her after that night. I only know she never came looking for us, and a mother like Cassia would have crossed 1,000 miles of enemy territory to reach her child if she had been able to. The silence that followed pressed down on the cabin like a physical weight. Alara stared at her own hands, trying to reconcile 22 years of half-truths and locked doors with the enormous, impossible story now unfolding in front of her. Why does it matter now? She finally asked. If the war ended so long ago, why do you still keep me hidden? Why all the locks and the warnings about the eastern woods? Odessa hesitated, and Alara recognized the hesitation immediately as the shape of one more secret she had not yet decided whether to share. Because bloodlines like yours do not simply disappear, Odessa said carefully. There has always been a prophecy tied to your family, old and half-forgotten, about a daughter of your line who would one day be bonded to the very pack that destroyed her family. Most wolves dismiss it as superstition, but the current ruling family has never fully let go of the fear that a surviving descendant could someday challenge everything they built on top of your mother's ashes. If they ever learned you existed and learned what your presence could mean, I do not believe they would let you live long enough to understand any of it yourself. Alara's stomach turned cold. The pull I've been feeling, the presence in the woods, you think it's connected to this? I do not know what it is, Odessa admitted. But I have never in 22 years seen you react to anything the way you have reacted these past few weeks. And I do not believe in coincidences, not when it comes to a bloodline that people have killed for. Alara thought of the crashing sounds outside the cabin weeks earlier, the shape she had glimpsed through the window, the impossible sense of being watched and recognized from within the trees that very morning. A cold certainty settled over her, one she could not fully explain but could not shake either. Someone found me, she said quietly. I pray that is not true, Odessa said, but I intend to take no chances. From this moment forward, you will not leave my sight unless it is absolutely necessary, and you will never again walk past that marker in the woods. Do you understand me? Alara nodded, though something inside her, some quiet, stubborn part of her chest, was already beginning to rebel against the idea of living the rest of her life, hidden away from a truth that had clearly been chasing her since before she was born. She did not say this out loud, not yet, but the seed of it had already taken root. Miles away, in the great hall of the pack house, Ronan sat through another restless council meeting, his mind only half present, Garrick Thorne droned on about border patrols and trade agreements with neighboring packs, but Ronan's attention kept drifting east, toward a pull he still could not name, and still had not mentioned to anyone but Finn. When the meeting finally ended, Finn lingered behind, as the rest of the council filed out, waiting until the room emptied before speaking. "I found something," he said quietly. Ronan's attention sharpened instantly. "Tell me." "I spoke with old Bertram, the pack historian." He wouldn't say much at first, kept insisting it was ancient history not worth digging up, but I pressed him. "There was a bloodline, generations back, that ruled the Eastern Territory before your grandfather's time. A rival family. There was a war. Your family won, and the losing bloodline was believed wiped out entirely." "Believed," Ronan repeated, "not confirmed." "That's the part Bertram got uncomfortable talking about," Finn said. "He mentioned rumors, old and mostly dismissed, that a single daughter from that bloodline may have survived the war and disappeared before anyone could confirm it. Nobody's ever found proof either way. Most wolves treat it as nothing more than an old story." Ronan's pulse quickened despite himself. "And the eastern woods? The stretch beyond our border patrols?" "That's the other thing," Finn said, lowering his voice further. "That territory used to belong to the rival bloodline before the war. If anyone from that family did survive and go into hiding, that's exactly where they'd have gone. It would explain why nobody's patrolled that deep in generations. It was practically abandoned after the war ended." Ronan stood slowly, walking to the window that overlooked the eastern edge of the training grounds, staring out at the distant tree line with new understanding settling heavily in his chest. "My wolf has been pulling toward those woods for weeks," he said. "Every night, stronger than the last. I dismissed it as stress, as pressure from the ceremony, but I don't believe that anymore." "You think there's a connection between the pull you're feeling and a bloodline that's supposed to be extinct?" "I think," Ronan said slowly, "that fated bonds do not care about old wars or old grudges. If there is a woman from that bloodline still alive out there, and if my wolf recognizes her the way it seems to be reacting, then I intend to find her, regardless of what the council thinks about ancient prophecies or old family rivalries." Finn studied him for a long moment. "If Garrick learns you're chasing rumors about a bloodline his own family helped destroy, he will not sit quietly. There are wolves in this pack, old ones, who still believe that bloodline was dangerous enough to justify what happened to them. If you bring a surviving descendant into the middle of pack politics, you could be putting a target on her before she even knows you exist." "Then we do this quietly," Ronan said. "No formal patrols, no announcements to the council. Just you and me, and anyone else you trust completely." "And if you find her?" Ronan was quiet for a moment, staring out at the trees, feeling that same restless pull tighten in his chest, like a rope drawing taut. "Then I find out whether everything I've been told my entire life about fate and bonds and duty was worth waiting for," he said. "Because I have never felt anything like this before, Finn. Not once. And I refuse to let old politics decide whether I'm allowed to feel it." That night, for the first time since the ceremony, Ronan slept without the restless ache pulling at his ribs, though he knew it was only a temporary peace. Somewhere beyond the border, a decision had settled into his bones, quiet and absolute. He would find whoever was calling to him from those woods, regardless of the cost, regardless of what old grudges stood in his way. He did not yet know her name. He did not know she was, at that very moment, lying awake in a small cabin only a few miles from his border, staring at the ceiling and turning over the impossible truth of her own bloodline, wondering for the first time in her life what it might feel like to finally step outside the boundaries that had defined her entire existence. Neither of them could have guessed how soon their paths would cross again, or how much closer that meeting would bring the very danger both Odessa and the Pack Council feared most. A twig snapped somewhere close to the cabin, and Alara's eyes flew open in the darkness. She had barely slept in 3 days, not since Odessa told her the truth about her mother, and every small sound now sent her pulse racing. She lay still, listening, counting her own heartbeats, waiting to see if the sound repeated. It did. Slow, deliberate footsteps, circling somewhere just beyond the walls. She slipped out of bed and crossed to Odessa's small room, but the bed was empty, the blanket still tucked neatly in place. Odessa had left before dawn again, as she had every day that week, always returning with less to say and more worry etched into her face. Alara was alone. She grabbed the iron poker from beside the fireplace, the same one she had held weeks earlier during the first strange encounter, and pressed herself against the wall beside the window, straining to hear anything beyond her own breathing. The footsteps stopped directly outside the door. A voice spoke, low and unfamiliar, a man's voice, rough at the edges. "I know someone's in there. I can smell you." Alara's blood ran cold. She did not answer. She did not move. "I'm not here to hurt you," the voice continued, though there was something in the tone that made her doubt the words completely. "I just want to talk. My employer has been very interested in this stretch of woods for a long time. Very interested in anyone who might be living out here quietly, keeping to themselves, staying hidden from patrols." Alara's grip on the poker tightened until her knuckles ached. She thought of everything Odessa had told her, about the bloodline, about the war, about people who had killed for exactly this reason. "There's nobody here," she called out, trying to keep her voice steady and failing. A low chuckle answered her. "Funny. Because I can hear your heart going twice as fast as it should be for someone who's alone in an empty cabin." Footsteps moved along the outside wall, slow and unhurried, testing the window shutters, testing the door. Alara's mind raced through every possible option and found none of them good. She was trapped, alone, facing something she did not fully understand, with nothing but an iron poker and a lifetime of unanswered questions to defend herself. Then, from somewhere in the distance, a second sound rose over the wind. A howl, deep and commanding, cutting through the night like a blade. The footsteps outside the cabin stopped instantly. "Company," the voice muttered, sounding suddenly less confident. "We'll finish this conversation another time." The footsteps retreated quickly, crashing away through the underbrush, and moments later, Alara heard the distant sound of something large moving fast through the trees, followed by shouting voices that did not belong to Odessa or to whoever had been standing outside her door. She stayed pressed against the wall for a long time after the sounds faded, shaking, straining to understand what had just happened. Odessa returned an hour later, breathless, her clothes torn at one sleeve, blood scraped along her forearm. She took one look at Alara's face and understood immediately that something had happened while she was gone. "Someone was here," Alara said, her voice trembling despite her best efforts to steady it. "A man. He said his employer was interested in the woods, in anyone hiding out here." Odessa's face went pale, and for the first time, Alara saw genuine, undisguised fear, rather than the careful, managed worry she was used to. "We need to leave," Odessa said immediately. "Tonight. This cabin is no longer safe." "Leave to where?" "I've lived here my entire life. I don't know anywhere else. Anywhere is safer than here now that they've found the woods." Odessa was already moving, pulling a leather satchel from beneath the floorboards, the same locked chest Alara had never once been allowed to see inside. "I always knew this day might come. I hoped I would have more time to prepare you." "Prepare me for what?" Alara's voice cracked. "You keep telling me pieces, Odessa, but never the whole truth. If we're in danger, I deserve to understand exactly what kind of danger it is." Odessa paused, the satchel clutched against her chest, and for a moment, something in her expression softened into something closer to grief. "There is a king who rules the pack bordering these woods," she said finally. "His family destroyed your mother's bloodline in the war I told you about. If his people find you, and if they understand what you are, I do not know what will happen. There are those among his council who still believe your bloodline poses a threat to their rule, prophecy or not. I have spent my entire life trying to keep you far from anyone connected to that pack." Alara's mind flashed unbidden to the pull she had felt toward the east, the strange recognition she could not explain, the sense of being watched by something that felt less like a threat and more like a piece of herself she had never known was missing. "What if not everyone in that pack wants to hurt me?" she said slowly. Odessa's eyes sharpened. "What do you mean?" "The pull I've been feeling. Toward the east. What if it isn't danger? What if it's something else?" "It does not matter what it is," Odessa said firmly, though something uncertain flickered behind her eyes. "We cannot take that risk. Pack up only what you need. We leave within the hour." Alara wanted to argue, wanted to demand more answers, but the fear in Odessa's voice was enough to move her feet, even as her mind rebelled against the idea of running from something she did not yet fully understand. She gathered her few belongings in silence, her thoughts circling back again and again to the pull in her chest, to the strange certainty that whatever waited for her in the east was not the enemy Odessa believed it to be. Meanwhile, at the pack house, Ronan stood in the war room with Finn and a small handful of trusted guards, examining a rough map of the Eastern Territory spread across the table. "Report," Ronan said, his voice tight with barely restrained urgency. One of the guards, a lean, quiet man named Corin, stepped forward. "We picked up an unfamiliar scent near the eastern border, my king. Not one of ours. We tracked it toward an old cabin, deep in the abandoned woods, further than any patrol has gone in years. Before we could close the distance, whoever it was retreated fast, heading south, away from our territory." "Was there anyone at the cabin?" Ronan asked, his pulse already quickening. "We didn't get close enough to confirm," Corin admitted. "The intruder's scent overlapped with something else, something we couldn't identify. Not quite wolf, not quite anything we've encountered before. It was faint, but it was there." Ronan exchanged a glance with Finn, both of them thinking the same thing without needing to say it aloud. "Someone else is hunting whoever is out there," Ronan said slowly, "which means we are not the only ones who suspect this bloodline survived. If someone got close enough to find that cabin," Finn said grimly, "whoever's hiding out there is no longer safe staying put. They'll run, and if they run, we may lose whatever trail we have." Ronan straightened, decision settling into his features with sudden clarity. "Then we move now, quietly, no formal patrol, just the four of us. I want to see that cabin myself." "My king," Corin said carefully, "if Garrick learns you left the territory personally to chase down an old bloodline rumor, Garrick will learn nothing until I decide he needs to," Ronan said, already moving toward the door. "I have spent weeks feeling something I cannot explain, pulling me toward those woods every single night. I am done waiting for permission to understand what it means." They left within the hour, moving swiftly and silently through the darkened trees, following the trail Corin had marked earlier that evening. The pull in Ronan's chest grew stronger with every mile, sharper and more insistent than it had ever been, until it felt less like an instinct and more like a rope drawing him forward against his own will. They reached the cabin just before midnight and found it empty, the door left ajar, a few scattered belongings abandoned on the floor, as though whoever lived there had left in a hurry. Ronan stepped inside slowly, his wolf pacing beneath his skin, with an urgency that bordered on desperation, and the scent that filled the small space hit him like a physical blow. It was the same scent that had haunted him for weeks. Warm, unfamiliar, achingly familiar all at once, woven through every corner of the small cabin as though it belonged there completely. "She was here," he said quietly, running his hand along the edge of a small wooden table. "She's been here her whole life." Finn stepped inside behind him, studying the abandoned room with a grim expression. "And now she's gone. Whoever came looking for her tonight scared her off before we could reach her." Ronan closed his eyes, letting the scent settle into his memory, committing it to something deeper than instinct. "Then we find her before whoever is hunting her does. I don't care how far she's run, or how well she's hidden. I felt this pull for a reason, and I do not intend to lose her now that I finally know she's real." Outside, the wind shifted, carrying the faint, fading trace of two travelers moving quickly south through the darkened trees, one of them clutching a locked chest full of secrets, the other carrying a growing certainty that the danger chasing them might not be the only force moving through those woods that night. Branches whipped at Alara's arms as she pushed through the dark undergrowth, struggling to keep pace with Odessa, who moved through the trees with a speed and certainty Alara had never seen from her before. "How much farther?" Alara gasped, her lungs burning. "Until it's safe," Odessa said, refusing to slow down. "We cannot stop until we've put real distance between ourselves and that cabin." They had been running for hours, the moon their only guide, the satchel with the locked chest clutched tight against Odessa's chest, as though it weighed nothing at all, despite the desperate pace. Alara's mind kept circling back to the man's voice outside the cabin door, the casual cruelty in his tone, the certainty that he would return. A sound cracked through the trees somewhere behind them, sharp and sudden, and both women froze instantly. "Keep moving," Odessa whispered, grabbing Alara's arm and pulling her forward again, veering sharply off the path they had been following. "Do not look back. Do not stop. no matter what you hear. They ran until Ilara's legs felt like they belonged to someone else, until the burning in her chest became a constant roaring ache, until finally Odessa pulled her behind a fallen tree trunk and pressed a finger to her lips. Footsteps approached, slow and confident, crunching through fallen leaves. Ilara held her breath, pressing herself as flat as possible against the cold ground, watching Odessa's face for any sign of what to do next. "You can't outrun me forever," the same rough voice from earlier called out into the darkness, closer now than Ilara wanted to believe. "I found your little hiding spot once. I'll find you again." Odessa's hand tightened around Ilara's wrist, a silent warning to stay perfectly still. The footsteps drew closer, pausing every few seconds, as though testing the air, searching for a scent trail that had gone momentarily cold. Then, from somewhere farther in the trees, a new sound rose, low and threatening, unmistakably the growl of something far larger and far more dangerous than a single man on foot. The footsteps near them stopped abruptly. "Company," the voice muttered, echoing the same word Ilara had heard him say outside her cabin days earlier. A moment later, the footsteps retreated quickly, crashing away through the underbrush in the opposite direction. Ilara let out a shaking breath, but Odessa did not relax. If anything, her grip on Ilara's wrist tightened further. "That growl," Ilara whispered. "It wasn't him, was it?" "No," Odessa said quietly, her eyes fixed on the darkness where the sound had come from. "It wasn't." They stayed hidden behind the fallen tree for nearly an hour, listening to the woods slowly settle back into silence around them. When Odessa finally judged it safe enough to move again, she led them at a careful, deliberate pace, avoiding the more obvious trails, doubling back twice to confuse anyone who might still be tracking them. By the time the sky began to lighten with the first gray hints of dawn, they had reached a narrow ravine, cut through the hillside, sheltered enough to offer a brief moment of rest. Odessa sank down against the rock wall, exhaustion finally visible on her face, and Ilara settled beside her, both of them too tired to speak for several long minutes. "That growl saved us," Ilara said eventually. "It did," Odessa admitted, "which troubles me more than I can say." "Why?" Odessa was quiet for a moment, staring out at the pale morning light beginning to filter through the trees. "Because whatever made that sound was close enough to know exactly where we were, and powerful enough to frighten off a man who was clearly hunting us with confidence. If it wanted to hurt us, I do not believe we would still be sitting here. You think it was protecting us?" "I think," Odessa said carefully, "that I do not know what to think anymore, and that frightens me more than any hunter chasing us through these woods." Ilara pulled her knees up to her chest, wrapping her arms around them, trying to process the events of the last few hours. The pull she had felt for weeks, the one Odessa dismissed as danger, had not led her toward destruction tonight. If anything, something connected to that pull had just saved both their lives. "Tell me the rest," Ilara said quietly. "Everything you haven't told me yet. I think I've earned it after tonight." Odessa studied her for a long moment, weighing something behind her tired eyes, and finally nodded, as though she too had reached the limit of how long she could keep certain truths locked away. "There is a reason your bond, whatever it is you have been feeling, points east," Odessa said slowly. "Your mother told me, before she sent you away with me, that there was an old prophecy tied to her bloodline. A daughter of her line, born after the war, would one day form an unbreakable bond with the very Alpha whose family destroyed her people. Cassia believed it was meant as a curse when she first heard it, a cruel twist of fate binding her child to her family's destroyers. But near the end, before she stayed behind to buy us time to escape, she told me something different." "What did she tell you?" "She said that if the prophecy was true, it was not a curse at all," Odessa said, her voice thick with old emotion. "She said it was meant to be a mending, a way for two broken bloodlines to finally become whole again, instead of remaining locked in a war that should have ended a generation before it did." Ilara's chest tightened, the weight of the words settling over her slowly. "You think the pull I've been feeling is that bond, the one from the prophecy. I do not know what else it could be," Odessa admitted. "I have spent your entire life trying to protect you from a war that ended before you were born, believing the only path to safety was keeping you as far from that bloodline as possible. But perhaps I was wrong. Perhaps the very thing I feared most is the only thing that can truly keep you safe now." Ilara stared out at the brightening sky, at the trees stretching endlessly toward the east, toward the pull that had lived quietly inside her chest for as long as she could remember without her understanding what it meant. "The king," she said slowly, "the one who rules that pack now. You think the bond is with him?" "I think," Odessa said, "that whatever growled in these woods tonight and frightened away a man clearly intent on harming us was no coincidence. I think we may no longer have the luxury of running from this any further. Then what do we do?" Odessa was quiet for a long moment, staring at the satchel resting beside her, the locked chest containing whatever final pieces of the truth still remained hidden. "We rest, just for a few hours. And then, I believe, it is time we stopped running from your mother's prophecy and started walking toward whatever it was always meant to become." Elara felt something shift inside her chest at those words, a mixture of fear and something else entirely, something that felt dangerously close to hope. For 22 years she had lived hidden, sheltered, kept apart from a truth too large and too dangerous to speak aloud. Now, for the first time, that truth was no longer something to hide from. It was something to walk toward. Miles away, Ronan stood at the edge of the abandoned cabin as dawn broke over the trees, the fading scent trail leading south growing weaker with every passing hour. Finn approached quietly, his expression grim. "We lost the trail near the ravine," Finn said. "Whoever they are, they know how to disappear." "Then we widen the search," Ronan said, his jaw tight with frustration, and something deeper, a fear he had not expected to feel so strongly, for a woman he had never even met. "I am not giving up, because the trail went cold once. There's something else," Finn added carefully. "One of the scouts reported a strange encounter near the ravine last night, said he startled someone off before doubling back, but he swears there was another wolf nearby. One he didn't recognize, powerful, protective, standing between the intruder and whoever he was tracking." Ronan's pulse quickened. "One of ours?" "He doesn't think so," Finn said, which raises an uncomfortable question. If it wasn't one of ours protecting her, who was it? Ronan turned to stare east once more, toward wherever the pull in his chest was leading him, toward a woman he had never spoken to but somehow already felt bound to protect with everything he had. "Then we have more competition than we realized," he said quietly, "and considerably less time than I hoped." The stranger appeared at the edge of the ravine, just as the sun cleared the treetops, and Elara's entire body went rigid with alarm, before she even registered who it was. He stood tall among the trees, dark hair damp from the morning mist, dressed in simple traveling clothes that did nothing to hide the quiet authority radiating from every line of his posture. His eyes found hers instantly, and the moment their gazes locked, something inside Elara's chest cracked wide open, a feeling so overwhelming and so immediate that she nearly stumbled backward from the force of it. Odessa was on her feet in an instant, positioning herself between Elara and the stranger, her whole body tensed for a fight she had no real chance of winning. "Stay back," Odessa warned, her voice hard. The stranger raised both hands slowly, palms open, showing he carried no weapon. "I'm not here to hurt either of you, I promise you that. Forgive me if I don't take a stranger's word in the middle of these woods," Odessa shot back, though Elara noticed her guardian's eyes kept flicking toward her, studying her reaction rather than the stranger's. Elara could not look away from him. Every instinct she had ever felt, every restless pull toward the east that had haunted her for weeks, every strange ache in her chest that she had never been able to explain, all of it suddenly made a terrible, undeniable kind of sense. She knew him. She had never met him in her life, and yet some deep, ancient part of her recognized him completely. "You're him," she said quietly, before she could stop herself. "The king." Something shifted in his expression, surprise mixed with a kind of relief, so profound, it looked almost painful. "You know who I am." "I've been told," Elara said carefully, still not moving from where Odessa had positioned herself protectively in front. "I've also been told your family destroyed mine." His jaw tightened, but he did not deny it. "I won't pretend that isn't true. There was a war, before either of us were born, and my family's hands are not clean of what happened in it. But I did not come here to finish what my ancestors started. I came here because I have not been able to think of anything else since the night I first caught your scent on the wind, weeks ago, and I needed to understand why." "You felt it too," Elara said, the words slipping out before she could stop them. Every night, he admitted, taking a slow, careful step closer, watching Odessa's tensed posture the entire time. I have walked away from every ceremony my council has arranged, feeling nothing. For years. And then a few weeks ago something changed. I felt a pull I had never experienced before, strong enough to keep me awake most nights, strong enough that I finally stopped ignoring it and started searching for its source. Odessa's hand found Ilara's arm, gripping tightly. This changes nothing. Bonds or not, your council would see her dead the moment they understood what her bloodline means to your family's rule. My council does not decide who I choose to protect, he said, his voice hardening slightly, though his eyes never left Ilara's face. I give you my word, on my own life, that I will not allow harm to come to either of you, not from my council, not from whoever has been hunting you through these woods. Words are easy, Odessa said bitterly. Cassia's people heard plenty of them before your family's soldiers ended their lives. The king flinched at that, a flash of genuine pain crossing his features. I did not know Cassia. I was not yet born when that war happened. I cannot undo what my family did to hers, and I will not insult either of you by pretending the past does not matter. But I am asking you to let me prove, through my actions rather than my words, that I am not the man who did those things. Ilara studied him carefully, weighing his words against the overwhelming certainty her own body seemed to feel in his presence. The pull toward him had not lessened with proximity. If anything, it had grown stronger, an ache in her chest that felt less like fear, and more like something finally settling into the place it had always belonged. Someone has been hunting us for weeks, Ilara said slowly, ignoring Odessa's warning glance. A man came to our cabin. He said his employer was interested in anyone hiding in these woods. He found us again last night, and something scared him off before he could reach us. A wolf. Was that you? No, he said, frowning. I was searching for you last night as well, but I did not encounter anyone. If there was another wolf protecting you, it wasn't one of mine. Ilara's stomach tightened uneasily. Then who? I don't know, he admitted. But I intend to find out, because whoever is hunting you clearly knows exactly what your bloodline means, and that troubles me far more than my own council's opinions. Odessa's grip on Ilara's arm finally loosened, though her expression remained guarded. If you truly want to help, then you will understand why we cannot simply follow you back into your territory. The moment your council learns who she is, her life will be in more danger than it has ever been, protection or not. I agree, he said immediately, surprising both of them. I am not asking you to walk into my pack house and announce yourselves. I am asking for the chance to earn your trust, slowly, on your own terms, while I work to secure her safety within my own ranks first. There are wolves loyal to me, who would protect her with their lives. I simply need time to ensure the right people know the truth, and the wrong ones do not. Ilara glanced at Odessa, searching her guardian's face for some sign of what to do, but for the first time in Ilara's entire life, Odessa looked genuinely uncertain, torn between decades of fear and the undeniable reality standing in front of them. My name is Ronan, he said softly, addressing Ilara directly now. I would like very much to know yours. Ilara, she said, and something in his expression softened further at the sound of it, as though her name settling into the air between them made everything suddenly, irreversibly real. Ilara, he repeated quietly, testing the shape of it. I have spent weeks chasing a feeling I could not explain, convinced I was losing my mind. I am relieved to know I was not. A twig snapped somewhere in the trees behind them, and all three of them went instantly alert, Ronan stepping forward protectively, even as Odessa pulled Ilara back a step. Show yourself, Ronan called out, his voice sharpening into the commanding tone of an alpha, rather than the careful, gentle tone he had used with Ilara moments earlier. A figure emerged slowly from the trees, and Ilara recognized the rough voice immediately, even before she saw his face. The man from the cabin, lean and hard-eyed, stepped into the clearing with his hands raised in mocking surrender, a cruel smile playing at the corner of his mouth. Well, the man said, looking between Ronan and Ilara with obvious delight. This is an interesting development. The Alpha King himself, out chasing rumors in the woods. My employer will be very pleased to hear about this. Who sent you? Ronan demanded, positioning himself fully between the stranger and Ilara now. Someone who has been waiting a very long time to confirm whether the old bloodline truly survived, the man said, his eyes flicking to Alara with an intensity that made her skin crawl. And it seems today, thanks to your little search party, I finally have my confirmation. You will not touch her, Ronan said, his voice dropping into something low and dangerous, his entire posture shifting into something far more threatening than the careful stranger who had approached them minutes earlier. The man only smiled wider. I don't need to touch her, Alpha King. I only needed to see her, and to see you standing beside her like she matters to you. That information alone is worth more to my employer than anything I could have taken by force. Before Ronan could respond, the man turned and disappeared back into the trees with startling speed, gone before anyone could react. Ronan started forward as though to chase him, then stopped himself, glancing back at Alara with obvious conflict written across his face. Let him go, Odessa said sharply. Chasing him now only leaves her unprotected. Ronan forced himself to relax, though the tension in his shoulders remained visible. He's right about one thing. Whoever sent him now has confirmation that matters far more than a rumor. This changes everything. It means we cannot stay in one place any longer, Odessa said grimly. Not here, not anywhere near these woods. Then come with me, Ronan said immediately. Not to my pack house, not yet, but I have a hunting lodge a half-day's travel from here, remote and known only to a handful of wolves I trust completely. You would be safer there than continuing to run blindly through unfamiliar territory. Odessa hesitated, clearly torn between decades of caution and the undeniable danger now closing in from every direction. Alara watched her guardian's internal struggle, understanding for the first time just how much weight this woman had carried alone, for 22 years, protecting a secret that had finally, inevitably, come to find them both. I trust him, Alara said quietly, surprising even herself with the certainty in her own voice. Odessa turned to look at her, searching her face for a long moment before finally, wearily, nodding. Then we go. But I am watching you closely, Alpha King. The first sign of betrayal, and I will not hesitate to run again, prophecy or not. I would expect nothing less, Ronan said, something like respect flickering across his features. He looked back to Alara, and the pull she had felt from the very first moment their eyes met settled into something steadier, something that felt, impossibly, like the beginning of safety rather than the danger she had spent her entire life fearing. We should move quickly, he said. Whoever that man reports to will not wait long to act on what he saw here today. They set off together through the trees, three figures moving with careful urgency toward an uncertain future, while somewhere behind them, in the shadow of the ravine, the man who had found them slipped away to deliver news that would soon set an entire pack's carefully buried secrets into motion once again. By the time the hunting lodge finally came into view through the trees, Alara's legs ached with a tiredness that went bone deep, but the sight of it, a low timber building tucked into a hollow surrounded by dense pine, brought a wave of relief so strong she nearly stumbled from it. Ronan moved ahead to check the perimeter himself, before allowing either woman closer, his senses clearly stretched thin from the tension of the journey. When he finally waved them forward, Alara noticed the careful way he watched the tree line, even as he held the door open, never fully letting his guard down. Inside, the lodge was simple but sturdy, a single main room with a stone hearth, a loft above for sleeping, and shuttered windows that Ronan immediately moved to secure. You'll be safe here, he said, kneeling to build a fire in the hearth. Only 3 wolves besides myself know this place exists, and all 3 would die before betraying its location. Forgive me if I remain cautious regardless, Odessa said, settling into a chair near the door, her posture still tightly wound, even in the relative safety of 4 solid walls. I understand, Ronan said simply, not offended by the distrust. You have every reason to be careful. I do not expect that to change overnight. Alara sank onto a bench near the fire, the adrenaline of the day finally beginning to fade and leave exhaustion in its place. She watched Ronan work, the careful, competent way he built the fire, checked the locks, moved through the space like a man accustomed to protecting others rather than being protected himself. Can I ask you something? She said quietly, once the fire had caught and begun to warm the room. Anything, he said, settling onto the bench across from her. Why did you keep searching? She asked. You could have dismissed the pull as nothing. Plenty of alphas probably do. when the timing is inconvenient or the source unclear. Why didn't you? Ronan considered the question carefully before answering. Because I have spent my entire adult life being told that duty comes before feeling, that my choices belong to the pack before they belong to me. I have made peace with that in almost every part of my life, but this was different. I have never felt anything as certain as the pull toward you, and something in me refused to let that certainty go unexamined, regardless of what it cost me politically. And now that you've found me, Elara said, what does it cost you? His expression turned serious. More than I fully understand yet. My council will not welcome this easily. There are wolves among them who still carry old grudges against your bloodline, who genuinely believe the war that destroyed your family was necessary and justified. Convincing them otherwise will not be simple. Then why risk it? Elara asked, genuinely curious. You could walk away right now. Return to your ceremonies. Choose someone your council approves of. Avoid all of this danger entirely. Ronan was quiet for a long moment, studying her with an intensity that made her chest tighten. Because I do not believe fate hands us these bonds by accident. And because, having felt what I felt the moment I first saw you today, I do not think I could walk away even if I tried. Something warm bloomed in Elara's chest at his words, tangled together with fear and uncertainty, and a cautious, fragile kind of hope she had never allowed herself to feel before. Odessa cleared her throat pointedly from her chair by the door, and both of them glanced over to find her watching, with an expression that was equal parts wariness and something almost like understanding. It grows late, Odessa said. Elara should rest. We have all had a difficult day. Elara nodded, though part of her wanted to keep talking to Ronan long into the night, to understand everything about the man her body had apparently recognized, before her mind had a chance to catch up. She climbed the small ladder to the loft, settling onto a simple bed tucked beneath the eaves, and found sleep coming far more easily than she expected, lulled by the quiet murmur of voices below as Ronan and Odessa continued speaking in low, careful tones. She did not hear all of their conversation, but she caught pieces, enough to understand that Odessa was finally, cautiously, beginning to share details about the years spent in hiding, about the locked chest still sitting in the satchel by the door, about promises made to a mother Elara barely remembered. She fell asleep to the sound of two people who had every reason to distrust one another, slowly, carefully, building something that might one day resemble an alliance. Miles away, in the pack house Ronan had left behind that morning, Garrick Thorne sat alone in his private study, a folded note resting on the desk in front of him, delivered only an hour earlier by a courier who refused to name his employer. The note was brief. It confirmed what Garrick had suspected for weeks, ever since Ronan began asking careful, deliberate questions about old bloodlines and abandoned territories. The rival family believed destroyed in the war generations ago had, in fact, survived. A daughter of that bloodline was alive, and the Alpha King himself had found her. Garrick read the note 3 times before setting it down, his expression unreadable in the dim candlelight. He had spent decades believing the old war had been fully and permanently resolved, the threat to his family's rule extinguished, along with every member of that rival bloodline. The possibility that a survivor existed, and that his own king intended to bond himself to her, threatened to unravel decades of careful political stability. He rose and crossed to the window, staring out at the dark tree line to the east, thinking of the prophecy his grandfather had once warned him about, the old fear passed down through generations, that a surviving daughter of that bloodline might one day challenge everything his family had built. He did not yet know exactly what he intended to do with this information, but he knew, with the cold certainty of a man who had spent his entire life protecting his family's position, that he could not simply allow this development to unfold unchallenged. He crossed to his desk, pulled out a fresh sheet of parchment, and began composing a message of his own, one that would need to reach certain members of the council before Ronan returned with whatever plans he had formed in the quiet safety of his hidden lodge. The war that everyone believed had ended a generation ago was not in fact over. It had simply been waiting, patient and quiet, for the right moment to begin again. Morning light filtered through the shutters when Elara woke to the sound of raised voices below, sharp and urgent, cutting through the quiet of the lodge like a blade. She climbed down from the loft quickly, heart already racing, to find Ronan standing near the door with a young guard she did not recognize, both men speaking in low, tense tones. Odessa stood nearby, her arms crossed tightly over her chest, her expression grim. "What's happened?" Elara asked, moving to stand beside her guardian. Ronan turned to her, and the careful composure he had maintained the previous night had cracked slightly, replaced by something harder and more urgent. "One of my scouts intercepted a message meant for a council member. It confirms what I feared. Someone already knows you're with me." "The man from the woods," Elara said. "It appears he wasted no time delivering his information," Ronan confirmed. "Which means we no longer have the luxury of moving slowly or carefully. Whoever he answers to will move quickly now that they have confirmation." The young guard, introduced simply as Corin, stepped forward with obvious unease. "There's more, my king." The message mentioned a name. "Garrick Thorne. It seems he already suspected something before your scout ever intercepted this note. He may have been watching your movements for longer than we realized." Ronan's jaw tightened visibly at the name. Garrick has always been cautious about matters concerning the old bloodlines. "If he's involved, this will not stay quiet for long." "Who is he?" Elara asked. "A senior member of my council," Ronan explained. "Old enough to remember the war firsthand, or at least the stories passed down from those who fought in it. He has never fully let go of the belief that your bloodline poses a threat to my family's rule, prophecy or not." Odessa's expression darkened further. "Then he will not simply report what he learns. He will act on it." "I don't intend to give him the chance," Ronan said firmly. "I need to return to the pack house and address this directly, before Garrick has time to turn the rest of the council against a truth they haven't even heard from me yet." "You're leaving us here," Elara said, an edge of alarm creeping into her voice. "Only for a short while," Ronan said, his expression softening as he looked at her. "Corin will stay behind to guard the lodge, along with 2 others I trust completely. I promise you, Elara, I would not leave if I believed there was any other way to protect you." Elara wanted to argue, wanted to insist on going with him, but some deeper instinct told her that walking directly into a pack house full of wolves, who might already suspect exactly who she was, would be far more dangerous than remaining hidden a little longer. "Be careful," she said instead, surprising herself with how much she meant it. Something shifted in Ronan's expression, warm and unguarded for just a moment, before the urgency of the situation reclaimed his focus. "I will return as quickly as I can, I promise you that." He left within the hour, taking Corin with him, and leaving 2 other guards, a quiet, watchful woman named Briar, and an older man named Alder, stationed carefully around the lodge's perimeter. The silence that settled over the small building after his departure felt heavier than it had the night before, thick with unspoken worry. Odessa finally broke the quiet by pulling the satchel from where she had kept it close throughout their journey, setting it on the table between them with a heaviness that suggested she had finally decided the time for secrets had ended. "I think," she said slowly, "it is time you saw what your mother left you." She produced a small key from a hidden pocket sewn into the lining of her cloak, and unlocked the chest for the first time in Elara's entire life. Inside lay a collection of items that seemed almost mundane at first glance: a folded letter yellowed with age, a small pendant on a worn leather cord, and a handful of pressed flowers, long since faded to brittle brown. "Your mother wrote that letter the night before she sent you away," Odessa said quietly. "I have never read it. She sealed it, and told me only that you should open it yourself, when you were finally ready to understand who you truly are." Elara's hands trembled slightly as she lifted the letter from the chest, breaking the fragile wax seal that had protected it for 22 years. The handwriting inside was elegant and careful, clearly written with great deliberation despite what must have been an unbearable amount of fear and urgency. She read it slowly, her eyes filling with tears she had not expected, as her mother's voice, preserved across 2 decades, finally reached her for the first time. The letter spoke of love, fierce and immediate, the kind a mother feels the moment she holds her child for the first time. It spoke of fear, of a war that had taken everything from Cassia, except the one thing she refused to let it take, her daughter's life. And it spoke, near the end, of hope. A hope Cassia herself had never lived to see fulfilled but had trusted would someday come true regardless. "If you are reading this," the letter said, in words Elara would carry with her for the rest of her life, "then you have survived long enough to understand what I could not tell you as a child. Our bloodline was never meant to end in war. It was meant to end in healing, in a bond between two families that history tried to keep apart forever. I do not know if you will ever meet the one fate intends for you. But if you do, I ask only that you choose love over the fear that has defined both our families for far too long. Do not let old grudges decide your future the way they decided mine. Alara set the letter down carefully, wiping at her eyes, and lifted the small pendant from the chest instead. It was simple, a piece of pale stone carved into the shape of two interlocking crescents, worn smooth from years against her mother's skin, before it was ever passed to her. She wore this her entire life, Odessa said softly. It belonged to her mother before her, and her mother before that, a symbol of your bloodline, passed down through every generation. Alara fastened the pendant around her own neck, feeling its weight settle against her chest, with a significance that went far beyond the simple stone itself. For the first time since Odessa had begun revealing the truth of her past, Alara felt something shift inside her, not fear, but a quiet, steady determination. I'm done hiding, she said, looking up at Odessa with new resolve. My mother didn't survive that war just so I could spend my entire life running from it too. Odessa studied her for a long moment, old worry warring visibly with something that looked almost like pride. Your mother would be proud to hear you say that, though I confess it terrifies me just as much as it moves me. Then we face it together, Alara said. Whatever happens next. Outside, the afternoon sun began its slow descent toward evening, and neither of them could have known that miles away, in the great hall of the pack house, Ronan was standing before an assembled council that had already begun turning against him, led by a man whose fear of the past ran deeper than his loyalty to his king's own happiness. Garrick stood at the head of the council table, his expression carefully neutral, even as the words he spoke carried unmistakable weight. You cannot seriously intend to bond yourself to a surviving member of a bloodline your own father fought to eliminate. Have you forgotten everything the war cost this pack? I have forgotten nothing, Ronan said evenly, though the strain of holding his temper was visible in the tight set of his shoulders. I have simply chosen not to let a war that ended before I was born dictate the rest of my life. It is not only your life at stake, another council member interjected, an older woman named Vesper who had served on the council for longer than Ronan had been alive. It is the stability of this entire pack. If word spreads that our king has bonded himself to the last surviving daughter of an enemy bloodline, we risk reigniting tensions that took a generation to settle. Or, Ronan countered, we risk nothing at all, because the war is over, and continuing to treat an innocent woman as an enemy, simply because of the family she was born into, is exactly the kind of thinking that started the conflict in the first place. Garrick's expression hardened. Innocent or not, her very existence threatens the legitimacy of everything your family built after the war. There are wolves in this pack who lost family members in that conflict. How do you propose to explain to them that their king has chosen to bond himself with the enemy? I propose, Ronan said, his voice rising with barely controlled frustration, that we stop treating a 22-year-old woman, who has spent her entire life hidden away in fear, as some kind of political threat, and start treating her as exactly what she is, a person. One who had no more choice in the family she was born into than any of us did. The room fell into tense silence, council members exchanging uneasy glances, none of them quite willing to be the first to fully side with either position. Ronan looked around the table, meeting each gaze in turn, refusing to back down despite the mounting opposition. I did not call this council to ask permission, he said finally, his voice quieting into something colder and more absolute. I called it to inform you of what has already been decided in my own heart. I intend to protect Alara, regardless of what any of you believe about her bloodline. The only question that remains is whether this council intends to stand with its king, or against him. Garrick's eyes narrowed, and though he said nothing further in that moment, the calculation visible behind his gaze made it clear the conversation was far from finished. As the council slowly dispersed, murmuring among themselves, Ronan remained standing at the head of the table, aware that he had just drawn a line that would not be easily uncrossed, and uncertain exactly how many of his own people would ultimately choose to stand on his side of it. Briar's low whistle cut through the quiet evening air, sharp and urgent, and Alara knew instantly something was wrong before the guard even reached the lodge door. Movement in the trees, Briar said, breathless, her eyes scanning the darkening woods beyond the perimeter. Several of them. moving fast, spreading out around the property. Odessa was on her feet immediately, pulling Alara back from the window. How many? Hard to say for certain. At least 6, maybe more. Alder appeared moments later from the opposite side of the lodge, his expression equally grim. Same on the north side. Whoever they are, they know exactly where we're positioned. This wasn't a lucky guess. Alara's pulse hammered against her ribs, the pendant her mother had left her suddenly heavy against her chest, as though it too sensed the danger closing in. Ronan said only a few people knew this place existed. Which means someone talked, or someone followed him here without his knowledge, Odessa said grimly, already moving to bar the door with the heavy wooden beam kept beside it. Either way, we cannot count on help arriving before whoever is out there decides to act. Briar exchanged a quick glance with Alder, some unspoken understanding passing between the two guards. We can hold the perimeter for a while, but if there are as many as it looks, we'll need more than the 2 of us to keep them out entirely. Then we don't wait to find out how many there are, Odessa said, turning to Alara with fierce determination in her eyes. There's a passage beneath the floorboards near the hearth, built for exactly this kind of situation. It leads to a ravine half a mile south. If things go badly here, you run, and you do not stop until you reach safety. I'm not leaving you, Alara said immediately. You will if it comes to that, Odessa said, her voice leaving no room for argument. I did not spend 22 years protecting you, just to let it end here. Outside, a voice called through the darkness, familiar and mocking, the same rough tone Alara had heard twice before. No need to make this difficult. My employer only wants a conversation. Hand over the girl, and the rest of you walk away untouched. You know how this ends if you don't comply, Alder murmured to Briar, both of them positioning themselves near the shuttered windows, weapons drawn. We hold as long as we can, Briar said grimly. Corin should be reaching the king with word of trouble by now, if he made it back in time. A crash sounded against the far wall, followed by another, testing the sturdiness of the lodge's construction. Alara flinched at each impact, her heart racing so fast it felt like it might burst from her chest entirely. The passage, Odessa said urgently, pulling up a section of floorboard near the hearth to reveal a narrow, dark opening beneath. Now, Alara, while there's still time. What about you? I will follow if I can, Odessa said, though something in her expression told Alara she did not fully believe her own words. But if I cannot, you keep running, and you trust that your mother's prophecy was worth every sacrifice made to protect it. Another crash sounded, louder this time, followed by the unmistakable splintering of wood. Alara's eyes filled with tears as she looked at the woman who had raised her, protected her, sacrificed decades of her own life for a promise made to a mother Alara barely remembered. I love you, Alara said, the words escaping before she could stop them. 22 years of unspoken gratitude compressed into 3 simple words. I love you too, Odessa said, her own eyes glistening, despite the fierce determination still holding her posture steady. Now go. Alara lowered herself into the narrow passage, the darkness swallowing her almost immediately, as Odessa replaced the floorboard above her. She crawled forward through the cramped space, her breath echoing loudly in her own ears, straining to hear anything happening in the lodge above. Muffled shouts reached her, followed by the sounds of a struggle, wood splintering further, and Briar's voice crying out in pain somewhere above. Alara forced herself to keep moving, tears streaming silently down her face, even as every instinct screamed at her to turn back. The passage finally opened into a shallow ravine, exactly as Odessa had described, and Alara emerged into the cool night air, disoriented and shaking, uncertain which direction offered the safest path forward. Behind her, in the distance, she could still hear the fading sounds of chaos at the lodge, growing more distant with every step she forced herself to take away from it. She ran until her legs gave out beneath her, collapsing against the base of a large tree, gasping for breath, her mind racing through every possible outcome of what she had just left behind. She did not know if Odessa had survived. She did not know if Briar or Alder had managed to hold off the attackers. She did not know if Ronan even knew yet that anything had gone wrong. A twig snapped somewhere nearby, and Alara's entire body went rigid with fear, certain her pursuers had somehow already found her despite the desperate distance she had put between herself and the lodge. Alara. The voice was familiar, urgent, and impossibly welcome. She turned to find Ronan, emerging from the trees, his expression a mixture of relief and barely contained fury. Corin close behind him, along with several additional guards she did not recognize. "You're safe," he breathed, closing the distance between them in seconds, his hands finding her shoulders as though he needed to confirm with touch that she was truly unharmed. "Thank the moon, you're safe." "The lodge," Elara said, her voice breaking. "Odessa, Briar, Alder, they're still there. We were attacked. I don't know if—" "We're going," Ronan said immediately, already turning to his guards with sharp, urgent commands. "Move now. If Garrick's people have taken the lodge, I want them stopped before they can do any more damage." Elara moved to follow, but Ronan caught her arm gently, his expression torn. "Stay here, with 2 of my guards. I need to know you're safe while we handle this." "I'm not staying behind again," Elara said fiercely, surprising herself with the sudden steel in her own voice. "Odessa risked everything to get me out of there. I am not going to sit safely in these woods while I don't know if she's alive." Ronan studied her for a long moment, something like respect and worry warring behind his eyes, before finally nodding. "Stay close to me then, and if I tell you to run, you run, no arguments." "Agreed," Elara said, though privately she was not entirely certain she would honor that promise, if it came down to it. They moved quickly back through the trees toward the lodge, the sounds of struggle growing louder as they approached, until finally, the building came into view, its door hanging broken from splintered hinges, smoke curling faintly from somewhere inside. Ronan's guards surged forward ahead of them, and the sounds of a fierce, brief confrontation echoed through the clearing, as Elara's heart pounded with terror, for everyone still trapped inside. She strained forward, desperate to see, and finally caught sight of a familiar figure being half carried, half supported, out of the lodge's broken doorway. "Odessa," Elara cried, breaking away from Ronan's side before he could stop her, rushing forward to catch her guardian as she stumbled the last few steps. Odessa's face was bruised, a shallow cut along her hairline, but she was alive, and the relief that flooded through Elara at the sight nearly buckled her knees entirely. "I told you to run," Odessa said, though there was no real anger in her voice, only exhausted relief. "I couldn't leave you," Elara said, holding her guardian tightly. "Not after everything you sacrificed for me." Behind them, Ronan's guards emerged with 2 captured attackers, bound and subdued, along with confirmation that the rest had fled into the darkness before they could be caught. Ronan approached, his expression grim as he surveyed the damage to the lodge, then turned to Elara with something fierce and protective burning in his gaze. "This confirms what I feared," he said quietly. "Garrick did not simply oppose me in council. He acted against you directly, and he did it quickly enough that he must have suspected this location before I even confirmed it myself." "What happens now?" Elara asked, still holding tightly to Odessa's arm. "Now," Ronan said, his jaw set with a determination that left no room for doubt, "I return to my pack house, and I make it very clear to Garrick, and anyone who stands with him, that the next time they move against you, they move against me directly, and they will not find me nearly as patient as I have been tonight." Elara looked out at the damaged lodge, at the exhausted guards tending to their wounds, at Odessa still trembling slightly from the fight she had barely survived, and felt something solidify inside her chest, a resolve that had been building since the moment she first read her mother's letter. "I'm coming with you," she said firmly. "I'm done hiding in the shadows while other people decide my fate for me. If Garrick wants a confrontation, then I intend to be standing right there when it happens." Ronan looked at her for a long moment, and though worry still shadowed his expression, something like pride flickered there as well. "Then we face him together," he said. "Tomorrow, at first light." The great hall had never felt so full to Elara, though she knew objectively that only a fraction of the pack stood assembled within its stone walls, drawn by whispered rumors that had spread overnight faster than anyone could have anticipated. She stood at Ronan's side, near the raised platform, Odessa positioned just behind her, both of them still bearing the visible marks of the previous night's attack. Elara had never in her life stood before this many people at once, had never felt so many curious, wary, and openly hostile eyes fixed on her all at the same time, and only the steady, grounding presence of Ronan beside her kept her from turning and fleeing entirely. Garrick stood near the council table, his expression carefully composed, despite the tension radiating from every line of his posture. He had clearly not expected Ronan to bring Alara before the assembled pack so openly, and the calculation visible behind his eyes suggested he was already working to adjust whatever plan he had originally intended. "My king," Garrick said, his voice carrying smoothly across the hall. "This is a bold move, presenting an outsider before the pack, without proper council deliberation." "She is not an outsider," Ronan said, his voice equally steady, pitched to reach every corner of the assembled crowd. "She is a member of this territory's history, whether this council chooses to acknowledge it or not, and I will not continue allowing decisions about her safety to be made in whispered council chambers while attackers move against her in the dark." A murmur rippled through the crowd at that, and Alara felt the weight of every gaze shift toward her more intensely, some curious, some suspicious, a few openly hostile. "You speak of attackers," Garrick said carefully, "but surely you understand how this appears, my king. You disappear from your duties, to chase rumors and abandon territory, return with a woman, claiming descent from a bloodline this pack fought a costly war to defeat, and now accuse members of your own council of ordering violence against her. These are serious accusations to make without evidence." "I have evidence," Ronan said, his gaze hardening as he looked directly at Garrick. "Two of my own guards can testify to the attack on the lodge last night. 2 attackers were captured and are currently being questioned. I do not believe it will take long before they reveal exactly who ordered their actions." Something flickered across Garrick's face, brief but unmistakable, and Alara watched several council members exchange uneasy glances at the exchange. "Even if such an attack occurred," Garrick pressed, though his voice had lost some of its earlier confidence, "that does not change the fundamental issue at hand. This woman's bloodline represents everything this pack fought to overcome a generation ago. Bonding our king to her risks reopening wounds that took decades to heal." Alara felt her pulse quicken, but rather than the fear she expected, something steadier rose up inside her instead, the same resolve that had carried her through the terror of the previous night. She stepped forward, before she could second-guess herself, drawing every eye in the hall directly onto her. "May I speak?" she asked, addressing the assembled council and pack alike, her voice trembling slightly, but carrying clearly nonetheless. Ronan glanced at her, surprise and something like admiration crossing his features, before nodding encouragingly. "I did not choose the family I was born into," Alara said, forcing her voice to steady as she continued. "I did not choose the war that happened before I was even alive, or the fear that has followed my entire existence because of a conflict I had no part in. I spent 22 years hidden away, kept from the world by a woman who sacrificed everything to protect me from exactly this kind of moment, because she believed, rightly, that simply existing made me a target." The hall had gone remarkably quiet, every eye fixed on her now, and Alara pressed forward, despite the way her hands trembled at her sides. "My mother died protecting me from this pack's fear of what my bloodline represented," she continued, her voice growing steadier with every word. "She left me a letter, written the night before she sent me away, and in it, she wrote that our families were never meant to remain enemies forever. She believed, even facing death, that healing was possible, that the prophecy tied to my bloodline was never meant as a threat, but as a chance to finally end a war that should have ended a generation before it did." She reached up, closing her hand around the pendant resting against her chest, drawing strength from the weight of it. "I understand that many of you have lost people to that war," she said, her voice softening with genuine empathy, rather than defensiveness. "I understand that fear does not simply disappear because I ask it to, but I am asking you to consider that continuing to treat me as an enemy, simply because of a war I never fought, and a family I barely knew, only continues the very cycle that cost so many of you everything in the first place." Silence held the hall for a long moment, and Alara searched the crowd nervously, uncertain whether her words had reached anyone at all, or simply confirmed the suspicions of those already inclined to distrust her. Then, from somewhere near the back of the hall, an older woman stepped forward, her weathered face marked by the kind of grief that comes only from surviving something terrible. "I lost my brother in that war," the woman said, her voice carrying clearly through the silent hall. "I spent years hating everything connected to your bloodline, but I have never once heard anyone from that bloodline speak the way you just spoke. My brother died fighting for a future he believed would be better for this pack. I do not believe he would want that future built on continued fear." A ripple of murmured agreement followed her words, and Alara felt something loosen in her chest, a tension she had carried since the moment she stepped into the hall. Garrick's expression tightened visibly, sensing the shifting mood of the crowd. Sentiment does not erase the practical dangers involved here. This bloodline's prophecy has always— "Enough, Garrick," Ronan said, his voice cutting sharply across the hall, carrying the full weight of his authority as Alpha King. "I have listened to your objections for weeks. I have given your concerns fair consideration, despite my own certainty about this bond. But I will not continue allowing fear of an old war to justify violence against an innocent woman, and I will not continue pretending your objections come solely from concern for this pack's stability, rather than your own discomfort, with a truth that challenges everything you believed settled." He turned to address the full assembly, his voice ringing with unmistakable resolve. "I intend to bond myself to Alara, not because prophecy or politics demand it, but because I have never in my life felt anything as certain as what I feel standing beside her now. I ask this pack to trust that judgment, the same judgment you have trusted to guide you through every other decision I have made as your king." The hall remained tense, but the earlier hostility had visibly softened, replaced by something more uncertain, more willing to listen. Ronan gestured toward two of his guards, who stepped forward escorting the captured attackers from the previous night's assault. "These two will answer for their actions," Ronan announced, "and anyone found to have ordered violence against an innocent member of this pack's territory will answer as well, regardless of their standing on this council." Garrick's face had gone pale, though he said nothing further, clearly recognizing the shifting tide of opinion, moving decisively against him. The two captured attackers exchanged uneasy glances, and Alara suspected it would not take much more pressure before they revealed exactly who had ordered the attack. As the tension in the hall slowly began to ease, replaced by murmured conversations and cautious, curious glances rather than open hostility, Alara felt Odessa's hand find her shoulder, squeezing gently in silent, proud acknowledgement. "You did well," Odessa murmured. "I meant every word," Alara whispered back. Ronan turned to her then, something warm and unmistakable shining in his eyes despite the seriousness of the moment. "Whatever happens with Garrick, whatever consequences follow from today, I want you to know that you just changed the way this entire pack sees you, through nothing but your own courage." Alara looked out at the hall, at faces that had shifted from suspicion to something closer to cautious respect, and felt, for the first time in her entire life, that she was no longer someone who needed to hide. 3 days after the confrontation in the Great Hall, the captured attackers finally broke their silence, and the truth spread through the pack faster than any rumor ever had. Garrick Thorne had ordered the assault on the lodge himself, acting without the council's full knowledge, driven by decades of old fear he had never fully released. When guards arrived at his chambers to bring him before Ronan for formal judgment, they found him already gone, his belongings hastily packed, fled sometime in the night, rather than face the consequences of what he had set into motion. "He won't get far," Finn said, standing beside Ronan as they surveyed the empty chambers. "I've already sent word to the border patrols. Wherever he's run, we'll find him." "Let him run for now," Ronan said, surprising his beta with the calm in his voice. "My priority is not chasing down a frightened old man who has already lost everything that mattered to him. My priority is making certain nothing like this happens again." The council, shaken by the revelation of Garrick's actions, moved swiftly to distance themselves from his decisions, several members publicly acknowledging that fear of the past had clouded their judgment about Alara's presence among them. It was not universal acceptance, not entirely, but it was enough of a shift that Alara finally began to feel something she had never once experienced in her 22 years of hiding. She felt, for the first time, like she belonged somewhere. Odessa remained close throughout those first difficult weeks, though her fierce protectiveness gradually softened into something more like cautious trust as she watched the pack slowly, imperfectly, begin to accept the truth of Alara's bloodline rather than fear it. She took up residence in a small cottage near the pack house, close enough to remain a steady presence in Alara's life, far enough to finally, after 22 years, allow herself to simply exist, without the constant burden of secrecy weighing on every decision. "I never imagined this," Odessa admitted one evening. sitting with Ilara in the garden behind the pack house, as the sun set in brilliant colors over the eastern hills. I spent so many years preparing for the worst. I never let myself imagine something this good might be waiting on the other side of all that fear. Neither did I, Ilara admitted, watching the sky shift slowly into deeper shades of gold and violet. But I'm glad it did. The bonding ceremony took place a month later, on a clear autumn evening, beneath the same trees that had once hidden Ilara from the world entirely. It was smaller than the grand mating ceremony Ronan had walked away from months earlier, more intimate, attended by those who had come to genuinely support the bond, rather than simply fulfill an obligation of tradition. Ilara stood before the assembled crowd, Ronan's hand held firmly in hers, and felt none of the fear that had defined so much of her life leading up to this moment. Instead, she felt only the steady, grounding certainty of the pull that had first drawn her toward him weeks earlier, now settled fully into something unshakable and real. I spent my entire life believing my existence was a danger to be hidden, Ilara said, addressing the gathered crowd with a confidence that would have seemed impossible to her only months earlier. I am grateful, more than I can express, to stand here today, surrounded by people who have chosen understanding over fear. Ronan squeezed her hand gently, his eyes shining with unmistakable pride and affection, as he turned to address the crowd himself. This bond was never meant to be a threat to this pack's future. It was meant to be its healing. I am proud, more than anything else in my life, to stand beside Ilara as we build that future together. As the ceremony concluded and the celebration began, Ilara found herself surrounded by well-wishes from pack members who, only weeks earlier, had regarded her with nothing but suspicion. Finn approached with a warm smile, clapping Ronan firmly on the shoulder, before turning to Ilara with genuine respect in his eyes. For what it's worth, he said, I don't think I've ever seen him this settled. Whatever fate decided to bring the two of you together, I'm grateful it did. Later, as the celebration continued around them, Ilara slipped away for a quiet moment, beneath the same trees where she had first met Ronan months earlier, the pendant her mother had left her resting warm against her chest. She thought of Cassia, of the letter written the night before an impossible sacrifice, of the hope her mother had carried even in her final moments, that healing might one day be possible. I hope you can see this, Ilara whispered into the quiet evening air. I hope you know it was worth everything. Ronan found her there minutes later, settling beside her beneath the trees with the easy familiarity of someone who had already learned every quiet corner of her heart. Thinking of her? Always, Ilara said softly. I wish she could have seen this. All of it. Perhaps she does, in whatever way these things work, Ronan said gently, pulling her closer against his side. I like to believe the people we've lost find some way to witness the moments that matter most. Ilara leaned into him, watching the last light of evening fade slowly into the deep purple of night, feeling the weight of 22 years of hiding finally lift completely from her shoulders. The war that had shaped both their families for a generation had finally, truly ended, not through further conflict, but through the simple, stubborn choice to believe healing was possible after all. What happens now? She asked quietly. Ronan considered the question for a long moment, his hand finding hers in the darkness, his voice steady with the same certainty that had carried him through every difficult decision of the past month. Now, he said, we build a future neither of our families ever believed possible. Together, and without fear. Above them, the stars began to emerge one by one across the darkening sky, steady and unwavering, much like the bond that had finally, after generations of war and hiding and fear, brought two broken bloodlines together into something whole. Ilara closed her eyes, listening to the quiet sounds of celebration still drifting from the pack house behind them, and felt, for the first time in her entire life, completely and unshakably at peace. The girl who had spent 22 years hidden from the world had finally found her place within it, not through the mating ceremony she had once been kept from entirely, but through a truth far stronger than any tradition, a bond that no war, no fear, and no old grudge had ever managed to break.